Have you ever watched someone, maybe even yourself, just do everything exactly right?
Mm.
Like they work incredibly hard, they follow all the rules, read the books, put in the hours, and yet they still just fail catastrophically.
Yeah, and then meanwhile, someone else seems to just stumble blindly into massive success.
Right. And we usually just write this off as luck or, timing or just the unpredictable chaos of life. But what if I told you they didn't fail because of bad luck?
Right.
What if the universe isn't chaotic at all, and their failure was actually the result of a localized mathematical algorithm firing inside their own brain, literally programmed to sabotage them at the exact moment they thought they were succeeding?
I mean, it completely upends how we understand personal agency, doesn't it? We really like to think of ourselves as the masters of our own destiny, just kind of navigating a random universe.
Exactly.
But this premise suggests the exact opposite, that the universe is flawlessly ordered, and we are the ones who are, well, fundamentally glitching.
Yeah, we look at our massive cities, our quantum computers, the space telescopes, and we have this collective human ego that says, we have arrived. We are the ultimate finished product sitting right at the absolute pinnacle of evolution.
Right, the top of the food chain.
But today's deep dive is going to ask you to consider something entirely different. What if that upward line of human progress is actually just a chaotic scribble? Like, what if everything you think you know about how the universe works and how you work is completely backwards?
It's a framework that really asks us to consider that humanity isn't at the pinnacle of evolution at all. Instead, we're stuck in a very messy, highly confused transitional period.
A transitional period.
Yeah, like we are essentially stumbling around in the dark, building our entire civilization on trial, error, and guesswork, while literally every other part of the universe operates on a flawless, trackable, mathematically perfect algorithm.
It's the ultimate paradigm-shattering premise. And to unpack this, we are exploring the work of Licenciado Juan Carlos Perez Velasquez. He's an independent scientist who spent 35 years deeply immersed in intensive research.
A lot of it isolated, right?
Yeah, isolated. Stepping away from traditional academic structures to figure out why human logic seems so disconnected from natural law. And in 1998, he claims to have discovered what he calls the quantum DNA of creation.
Which is the foundation of a proposed new science he calls genetic vibration. And I mean, at its core, the claim here is just staggering. This framework purports to have mapped the exact space-time sequence of every single thing in the universe.
Everything.
Yet, we aren't just talking about biological entities like human beings or animals. We are talking about everything. A political party, a corporation, a physical object, a disease.
If it exists, it has a sequence.
Exactly.
And for you listening right now, whether you're trying to figure out why you keep repeating the exact same destructive patterns in your relationships, or, I don't know, you're a CEO looking for an absolute edge in your market, or you're just intensely curious about the fundamental fabric of reality, this deep dive is designed to map that out.
Because if this framework holds true, it promises that there is a customized, mathematically precise creation design that explains exactly why you exist,
Right.
what your absolute limits are, and the specific mechanics of your own self-sabotage.
And before we really get into the mechanics of how this all works, we need to establish some ground rules.
Right.
Because when you start throwing around terms like quantum DNA and creation, people immediately start thinking about mysticism or New Age philosophy.
Or extraterrestrial theories.
Yeah, ancient aliens, all of that. We need to be crystal clear. The framework we are exploring today explicitly, aggressively rejects all of that.
Right. There are no crystal healings here, no metaphysical energy fields.
Fine.
Perez Velasquez bases this framework entirely on absolute natural laws, observable properties, and very rigid space-time principles. It is presented as cold, hard, algorithmic mathematics.
But because it claims to be the absolute root of reality, it's also highly polarizing. I mean, to give you a sense of the scale, this framework asserts that roughly 92% of all current human thought is fundamentally flawed.
Yeah, that's a massive number.
Wait, 92%? That means the way we currently conduct scientific research, the way we structure our economies, the philosophies we build our lives around, almost all of it is just relative guesswork.
According to this discovery, yes, it's an illusion built on shifting sand.
Okay, we really need to unpack that because claiming that 92% of human knowledge is basically a sophisticated guess is a massive accusation. So to understand how he arrived at that number and what this quantum DNA actually is, we have to go back to 1983.
Right, his university days.
Yeah, that's when Perez Velasquez was a student and he hit this wall of profound frustration regarding a massive disconnect between nature and the human mind.
It started with a very simple observation about absolute creations versus relative concepts. I mean, if you look closely at nature, the universe is entirely absolute in how it creates.
Absolute.
Yes, it never second guesses itself. It doesn't deal in probabilities or maybes when it comes to fundamental identity.
Let's make that concrete for the listener. Give me an example of an absolute creation.
Okay, think about agriculture. If you take an orange seed and you plant it in the ground, and, the conditions are right for it to grow, you will absolutely get an orange tree.
Right. I'm not going to wake up one day and find an apple tree. I'm
Exactly.
not going to get a pine tree.
The sequence is absolute. The seed contains the exact, unalterable directive for an orange tree. Or, well, look at human biology. A human heart is a creation specifically designed to pump blood.
Right.
It functions with an absolute objective. It doesn't wake up one Tuesday and suddenly decide, you know what, I'm tired of pumping blood. Today, I'm going to filter air like the lungs.
It physically cannot. The design is absolute. Even if we go down to the atomic level, right? Like if I have an atom with exactly 6 protons in its nucleus, it is carbon.
Always.
It perfectly dictates that atom's properties. If I add a proton, it absolutely becomes nitrogen. There's no debate. The atom isn't having an existential crisis about its identity. It just is.
Precisely. Nature operates on an absolute platform. But then he looked at human thought. And human thought, according to this framework, is the exact opposite. It is entirely relative.
Meaning what exactly? Like, how does our thinking differ from the orange seed?
Well, we constantly generate ideas, concepts, political systems, and religions that are endlessly shifting. We build an entire society on one economic model, and 50 years later, we tear it down and say it was flawed.
We argue endlessly.
Endlessly over the truth. We divide ourselves into factions, going to war over differing philosophies, precisely because none of those philosophies are absolute. They're relative constructs generated by a brain that doesn't actually understand the base seed of creation.
So, if I'm understanding this correctly, we are the only entity in this perfectly ordered absolute universe that is operating on relativity. We are the anomaly.
Yes. And this brings us to how we approach knowledge itself. Because our thought process is relative. When we encounter something we don't understand about the universe, when we hit a gap in our knowledge, we don't have the absolute answer. So what do? We fill that gap with speculation.
We guess.
We guess. And the framework points out that theories like the Big Bang or the multitude of varying religious origin stories are actually symptoms of this exact human ignorance.
Really? The Big Bang is a symptom of ignorance.
Well, according to the sources, yes, because science cannot perfectly track the origin of existence backward to an absolute 0 point. So it creates a massive hypothesis, a highly educated guess like the Big Bang, to fill the gap.
And when a new discovery comes along that challenges the Big Bang, we just adjust the guess. We add dark matter or string theory just to make the math work.
Exactly. We build a model, we find its flaws, we build a new model to cover the flaws, and the cycle continues endlessly. We end up in a world saturated with conflicting relative truths where every single scientific discipline or ideological group thinks they hold the ultimate answer.
But none of them actually possess the absolute fundamental platform.
Yeah.
The author brutally categorizes a lot of this gap filling as pseudoscience.
Yes.
It's like nature is playing a flawlessly programmed, mathematically perfect video game. The physics engine works, the rendering is perfect, and humans are the only characters inside the game who are arguing over what the code actually says.
That's a great way to put it.
We're debating whether the sky is rendered in OpenGL or DirectX, while the code is just running perfectly fine in the background, ignoring us completely.
That's a fantastic analogy. We are debating the nature of the code without ever having access to the source code itself.
But hold on, this raises a really critical question, and I imagine it's the same paradox Pérez Velázquez hit in the 80s. If the human brain is itself a biological creation of the universe, and we just established that the universe only makes absolute perfect creations, how could an absolute creation like the human brain possibly generate flawed relative ideas?
Right. It's a paradox.
How does a perfectly programmed machine print out a typo? That doesn't make logical sense.
That is the exact paradox that drove this entire investigation. He realized that if the brain truly is an absolute creation of the universe, then it must possess the mechanical capacity to generate an absolute idea. It can't be 100% relative.
There had to be something absolute hiding in our thought history.
So he went looking for a constant.
A constant.
He needed to find a single, solitary idea generated by the human mind that had never changed. Not once. An idea that survived every single evolutionary transition, every societal collapse, every linguistic shift since the very dawn of human consciousness.
That sounds like looking for a needle in a haystack of thousands of years of human history. Did he actually find a constant?
He did. He found it in the binary system.
Wait, binary, like zeros and ones, computer code?
Yes, but long before computers. The fundamental concept of two opposing absolute states, 0 and 1, on and off, open and closed, light and dark. This unbroken binary concept became his breadcrumb trail.
Okay.
Think about it. Our modern digital era is entirely built on this binary constant. Every supercomputer, every smartphone, every artificial intelligence operates at its base level on switches that are either open or closed, 0 or 1.
Okay, I see that. But how does that connect back to antiquity? I mean, a computer from the 1950s isn't exactly the dawn of humanity.
Because the concept didn't start with digital computers. He traced this exact same structural logic back through history. The framework connects it to ancient Chinese oracles, specifically the I Ching.
Oh, right.
The I Ching is based on hexagrams composed of solid and broken lines, yin and yang, opposing binary states used to map reality.
Oh, wow. So a solid line is a 1 and a broken line is a 0.
Exactly. He found the same fundamental binary logic in the ancient Ife Empire in Nigeria in their divination systems. He found it encoded in the architectural and mythological structures of ancient Egypt. It's the one concept that the human brain produces identically, regardless of geography, culture, or time period.
So the modern software engineer in Silicon Valley writing binary code has no idea that the 0 and 1 they are typing are actually the exact same surface reflection of a universal constant that a priest in ancient Egypt was contemplating.
Precisely. This binary constant was the doorway. It was the proof that the human brain could process absolute logic. And by following this constant, it led him to the discovery of what is actually behind the 0 and the 1, the fundamental, unviolable algorithm of the universe, quantum DNA.
Okay, so he follows the binary breadcrumbs and discovers this underlying algorithm. But before we get into the actual mechanics of quantum DNA, we have to talk about the trap we are currently stuck in. Because to understand the solution, you have to really feel the weight of the problem. The framework calls our current state of existence the macro world. And it basically states that everything we currently consider to be advanced science is essentially an illusion.
It's a methodological illusion. The macro world is the term used to describe how humans currently perceive existence. It is characterized entirely by global, superficial concepts. It's the hallmark of this messy evolutionary transition period we are in.
So what does it mean to perceive the world superficially? Give me an example of how the macro world tricks us.
Okay, think about walking down a beach. You see a structure built out of the sand and you point to it. Any human in the macro world will look at it and call it a sandcastle. We identify it by its global superficial shape and its temporary function.
Right, it looks like a castle. It's made of sand. Sandcastle. Simple.
But that is a macro world definition. It stops at the visual surface. The quantum DNA framework wouldn't call it a sandcastle. It would define it absolutely as an integration of quantum particles.
But doesn't our current science go deeper than the surface? I mean, we don't just stop at the sandcastle. We know the sand is made of silica, and silica is made of silicon and oxygen atoms. We have electron microscopes. We know that in biology, organs are made of cells, cells are made of molecules, molecules are made of atoms.
And for a very long time, classical physics stopped at the atom. Then we cracked the atom and found protons, neutrons, and electrons. And even when quantum mechanics began finding smaller subatomic particles like quarks, the macro world mentality still treats these physical building blocks as the ultimate seed of reality.
We keep looking for a smaller and smaller physical pebble.
Exactly. But Perez Velasquez argues that subatomic particles are not the ultimate seed of creation. They are just the deepest basement of the macro world. By obsessing over the physical building blocks, our science remains incredibly inefficient because it relies entirely on hypotheses to figure out how those blocks interact.
I want to spend some time on this idea of the hypothesis, because the framework absolutely tears apart the scientific method here. There is this analogy used in the sources to explain the flaw of our scientific process, and I think it's brilliant. It's the ant analogy.
Oh, it perfectly highlights the immense trap of trial and error.
Let's really visualize this for the listener. Imagine a highly advanced society of ants. They have a science department, they have universities, and they decide they want to study a human being. They want to map out Human behavior, human lifespans, how human disease works. Everything.
An ambitious project for an ant.
Incredibly ambitious. And here is their fundamental problem. A worker ant only lives for about 1 to 2 years. A human lives for 80 years. So a single ant scientist can only observe a microscopic fraction of the human's timeline.
They lack the space-time capacity to see the whole picture.
Exactly. So what do the ants have to do? Ant scientist number one watches the human for a year, takes copious notes, makes a guess about what the human will do next year, and then the ant dies. He passes his notes to ant scientist number two. Ant number two reads the notes, tests the previous guess, realizes the human did something completely different, writes a new guess, and then dies. They have to pass these fragmented observations down through 50 generations of ants just to study a single human lifespan.
The amount of wasted resources, misinterpretations, and lost data in that generational chain would be astronomical.
And the framework argues that this is exactly what human scientists are doing today. Because our lifespans are incredibly short relative to the cosmic or even evolutionary scale, we have to guess. We observe a fragment of a phenomenon, we formulate a hypothesis, which is really just a polite academic word for a guess, and we test it.
We throw millions of dollars, vast amounts of energy, and decades of researchers' lives at testing that guess.
And when the guess is wrong, when the drug trial fails or the sociological model collapses, we shrug and call that catastrophic failure experience. We say, well, now we know what doesn't work. It's an incredibly blind, wasteful way to navigate the universe.
What is fascinating here is the absolute dissection of the scientific method itself. In a universe governed by absolute laws where an orange seed always produces an orange tree, guessing is a glaring symptom of profound ignorance. If you know the underlying code, you never have to hypothesize, you just read the algorithm.
And because we are stuck guessing in this macro world, the framework makes a really sobering claim. We are absolute slaves to our molecular DNA.
From a macro perspective, we truly are. Think about how much of your life is dictated by your molecular biology. Your DNA dictates your physical structure, your height, your susceptibility to specific genetic diseases.
Yeah.
It dictates your baseline neural pathways, which influence how fast you can process information or regulate your emotions. It is a biological dictator operating inside your cells.
We spend billions in medicine trying to slightly edit or manage that dictator. But the framework says that molecular DNA isn't actually in charge. It says that quantum DNA represents the unseen strings pulling the molecular DNA.
Yes. If molecular DNA is the biological puppet, quantum DNA is the space-time puppeteer. Molecular biology only executes the physical manifestation of the quantum code.
So, if you want to actually cure a disease or fundamentally change a behavior, editing the molecular DNA is just treating a symptom. You have to find the puppeteer. But how do we prove that modern science is actually stuck? I love this practical test you can do. Let's call it the toddler method.
It's a devastatingly effective way to expose the limits of the macro world.
If you want to see how quickly modern science hits a dead end, just take any leading specialist in the world, a top geneticist, a top astrophysicist, and act like a persistent 3-year-old. Just keep asking them why.
And watch how fast the foundation crumbles.
Exactly. You ask the oncologist, why do cells divide uncontrollably in this cancer? They say, because of a mutation in the chemical signaling pathways. You ask, why do those chemical pathways mutate? They say, because of an error in genetic expression. You ask, why does the gene express that exact error at that exact moment in time?
And right there, or maybe one step farther, they hit a wall.
The brilliant specialist eventually has to shrug. They will say, well, we don't fully understand the underlying mechanism, or it's a random quantum fluctuation, which is just macro world code for we don't know the absolute origin point. They do not know the definitive seed of creation.
Which brings us to the ultimate pivot. If hypotheses are just blind guessing, and asking why eventually leads to a dead end of ignorance, what is the alternative? How do we actually cross over from the illusion of the macro world and access the reality of the micro world?
How do we stop guessing and start reading the code?
To do that, we have to discard the hypothesis entirely. We must rely exclusively on absolute laws. And this is the mechanical foundation of the 1998 discovery. We need to be clear. Quantum DNA is not a physical object. You cannot put it in a centrifuge. You cannot look at it under an electron microscope.
It's not a glowing, ethereal string of light floating in space.
No, it is a sequence. It is an absolute algorithm, a program of creation built entirely on inviolable universal natural laws. And to understand how this algorithm is structured, the framework provides a primary foundational law. Every existence in the creation responds to an integration of particles according to a specific space-time of creation.
Okay, stop right there. That sounds incredibly dense and academic. An integration of particles according to a specific spacetime. Let's break that down mechanically, because once you understand this, the whole framework clicks into place.
It starts by creating a fundamental division in how we view reality, the difference between creators and creations.
Walk me through that. What is a creator versus a creation?
Let's use a tangible example. Imagine you are holding a ceramic coffee cup. In this framework, the cup itself is the creation. The particles, the molecules of clay, the heat energy used to bake it that integrated to form that ceramic shape, those are the creators.
Okay, so the final product is the creation. The ingredients are the creators.
Exactly. And here's the crucial distinction. The creation is ephemeral. You can drop that coffee cup on the floor, and it shatters. The cup ceases to exist. But the particles, the creators that made it up, do not cease to exist. They just scatter.
Or look at water. Water is a creation. Hydrogen and oxygen are the creators. When hydrogen and oxygen integrate under specific conditions, they create water. If you run an electrical current through the water and separate them, the creation is gone. But the hydrogen and oxygen, the creators, remain completely intact. Everything in the universe, without exception, is the result of an integration of particles.
Exactly.
So that covers the integration of particles part. But what about the specific space-time part? How does time play into this algorithm?
Time is the trigger. The framework gives a really beautiful, easily understood biological example. Think about an unfertilized human egg and a single sperm cell. Sitting in a laboratory dish completely separated, they are just single, isolated cells. They have potential, but they aren't doing much. They aren't building a human. But the exact mathematically precise microsecond that they make contact, the exact moment they integrate in space and time, an absolute algorithm is triggered.
A program executes, and you can't stop it.
It is an unviolable sequence. The moment of integration sets off a chain reaction. The cells divide into 2, then 4, then 8, then 16. And it follows a perfect order. The universe never skips a step. You do not spontaneously grow a fully formed, beating heart before you have developed the blood vessels to support it.
The algorithm demands chronological perfection. It's like macroevolution, too. You don't get a species of fruit-eating monkeys evolving millions of years before the actual fruit trees evolve. The sequence is flawless.
And this is exactly what Pérez Velázquez claims to have mapped. He states that by understanding this rigid algorithmic progression, you can trace the exact point of integration, the space-time coordinate of literally anything.
Explain the math to me conceptually here, because tracing the sequence of a human embryo is one thing. We can watch that happen under a microscope. But tracing the sequence of a corporation or a political movement, how do particles know what to do in those scenarios?
Because a corporation is still an integration. It's an integration of a founder's idea, which is a neural particle integration with capital. At a specific date in a specific location, it has a birth coordinate. And because the universe operates on absolute laws, if you know the precise starting conditions of an integration, the subsequent chain of events is mathematically inevitable.
So it's deterministic. It's like classical physics. If I know the exact mass, velocity, and trajectory of two cars heading toward each other, I don't have to guess what will happen.
Right.
Physics allows me to calculate exactly where the point of impact will be and exactly where the debris will land.
Exactly. The framework scales that deterministic physics down to the quantum root of existence. And to process this infinite web of calculations, Pérez Velázquez developed what is called the Matrix XL, or the Intelligent Computerized Quantum System.
Let's talk about the Matrix XL, because this sounds like the ultimate cheat code for reality.
It is positioned as exactly that. The claim is that if you can pinpoint the exact origin coordinate in space and time for any existence, an ant, a CEO, a country, you plug that into the Matrix XL, the system then extracts the entire unviolable sequence of that existence.
Without a single hypothesis, no guessing.
Zero guessing. Because the algorithm is absolute, the system allows you to travel backward or forward in the sequence. You can see what events mathematically must happen, what the absolute limitations of that existence are, and when its sequence will terminate.
Wait, hold on. I have to push back here because the implications of this are staggering. If you have the sequence and it's absolute, this implies you literally have the entire timeline of a person's life mapped out. You could see the exact future of a country. You could see the exact date a business will declare bankruptcy before they even open their doors.
That's the claim, yes.
It sounds like you are reading the matrix of reality, which frankly sounds like science fiction. How is this infinite, overwhelming amount of data actually visualized? How does a human being read a space-time sequence so that it's actually practical and useful?
That is the essential question. Raw quantum data is useless unless it can be translated into a usable architecture. To answer how this infinite data is made practical, we have to look at the specific template used by the matrix XL to map any given entity. This translation tool is called the Quantum Creation Design, or Diseño de Creación Cuántica.
This is the blueprint.
It is the universal template. The framework details that absolutely every single existence in the universe, whether it's a planet, a localized virus, a political ideology, a loaf of bread, or you, the listener tuning in right now, can be perfectly mapped using this specific three-part blueprint.
Okay, I want to walk through these three parts meticulously because this is where the theoretical high-level physics
Mhm.
turns into something you can almost touch and apply to your daily life. What is part one?
Part one is called the pattern, sometimes referred to as the genetic pattern or the quantum mold, patrón genético or molde quántico. This part of the blueprint represents the absolute why of creation, the core, unchangeable objective. Why were you created? What is your fundamental algorithmic purpose for taking up space in the universe?
And the framework uses an incredibly elegant metaphor to explain this, right? It links the blueprint to atomic structure.
Yes. The framework uses the atom as a perfect mirror for the quantum design, proving the Hermetic principle that the micro reflects the macro. Think about the nucleus of an atom. It is packed tightly in the center, made of protons and neutrons. The number of protons in that nucleus determines absolutely what element that atom is.
Right, it determines its identity. Carbon, gold, oxygen.
Exactly. The nucleus doesn't interact much with the outside world. It just sits in the center and dictates the objective. That is the pattern. It is your unchangeable core identity.
Okay, so part one is the pattern, the core identity. The why. What is part two?
Part two is called coexistence, or social relation. Convivencia, or relation social. This part of the blueprint maps the entity's precise environment. It details exactly who or what you are mathematically designed to integrate with smoothly, and conversely, who your absolute natural predators are.
So it's your quantum ecosystem. It maps out your allies and your enemies before you even meet them.
Correct. And linking it back to the atomic metaphor, coexistence corresponds to the inner orbital electrons, the electrons that are closest to the nucleus. They don't typically bond with other atoms, but they establish the immediate local environment and the internal stability of the atom itself.
Got it. Pattern is the nucleus. Coexistence is the inner electrons. And finally, part three.
Part three is the final capacity, or final goal, capacidad final or meta final. This is perhaps the most crucial for human application. It indicates the ultimate potential, or the absolute limit of the creation. It shows exactly how far that entity can go and exactly how it will respond to specific external stimuli.
Where does this fit in the atom?
In our atomic metaphor, this links perfectly to the outermost electrons, known in chemistry as the valence electrons. These are the electrons that actively reach out and interact with other atoms to form molecules and trigger chemical reactions. They determine the atom's ultimate capacity to bond, react, and create new structures.
So, to summarize the blueprint, pattern, coexistence, final capacity, why you exist, where you belong, and how far you can go. Now, this brings us to a massively controversial point in the text. Because if part three, your final capacity, is an absolute pre-programmed limit, it completely destroys the modern self-help industry.
Oh, decimates it. The sources explicitly label the modern inspirational idea of unbounded human willpower as a great scam.
A scam. Entire multi-billion-dollar industries are built on this scam.
The premise of the framework is unapologetic. If you believe that with enough hustle, enough grind, enough positive thinking, and sheer willpower, you can achieve absolutely anything you set your mind to, you are living in a profound delusion.
Hold on, are you saying human agency basically doesn't exist? That sounds incredibly deterministic. It sounds like biological fatalism. If I want to start a company and I work 80 hours a week, you're saying it doesn't matter.
The framework argues that you cannot willpower your way out of your algorithmic programming. If your specific three-part quantum space-time sequence is not mathematically designed for you to be the president of a country or a billionaire CEO or a world-class athlete, you simply never will be. You can grind for 40 years, you can ruin your health, you can destroy your relationships, but you will hit your final capacity and bounce off.
That is going to sound incredibly bleak to a lot of people. It sounds like being trapped in a cage.
Yeah.
But let's flip the perspective for a second, because I actually think there is a profound psychological liberation hidden inside this determinism. Imagine the relief.
The relief of absolute boundaries.
Yes. Imagine actually knowing your exact final capacity. and your exact coexistence parameters. Imagine knowing I am algorithmically designed to be a brilliant number two, a chief operating officer, but I'm not designed to be the founder. You would never waste a decade grinding away, losing sleep, feeling like a failure because your startup went under.
Right, because you'd know.
You would know it wasn't in your design. You wouldn't force yourself into a toxic relationship thinking you can fix the person because you would look at their sequence and see they are your quantum predator. You could stop striving to be everything and optimize for exactly what you were designed to do.
It fundamentally shifts the goal of human life. The goal is no longer the exhausting pursuit of becoming anything. The goal becomes perfecting the execution of what you inherently are. According to this framework, human suffering primarily occurs when an entity tries to violently step outside its specific programmed sequence. You suffer when you try to force a hydrogen atom to act like a gold atom.
Okay, I love that. But that creates a massive glaring friction point in the logic. I need you to explain this to me. If we all have this perfect, absolute three-part design, a flawless mathematical algorithm guiding our existence, why is the world such a disaster? Why is there so much suffering, disease, war, addiction, and failure? If the sequence is perfect, how does a perfect system create such an unmitigated mess?
That friction point is exactly what pivots our deep dive into what is arguably the darkest, most crucial concept of the entire genetic vibration framework. We have to introduce the concept of the quantum opposite, or opposto quantico. This is the precise mechanism that explains how severe human suffering exists within a mathematically perfect universe.
So how does a perfect algorithm create an enemy? Where does the bug in the code come from?
To understand the origin of the quantum opposite, we have to introduce another rigid universal law from the text. Creation does not deny itself.
Meaning what in practice? Let's use a real-world example.
Let's look at biological human reproduction. If you have two human beings, a man and a woman, they share the same overarching molecular DNA structure. They are both biologically human. Because of this molecular compatibility, physical reproduction is possible. Creation does not deny biological fusion when the biology matches. The sperm and the egg can integrate.
Right, a human biology accepts human biology. A human can't reproduce with a bird or a tree.
Exactly. However, while their molecular DNA matches perfectly, their quantum space-time sequences, their specific three-part blueprints, might be entirely incompatible. They represent two wildly different conflicting points in the universal algorithm.
So the biology says, yes, let's fuse, but the quantum code says fatal error.
Precisely. And when you fuse two fundamentally incompatible quantum sequences, a quantum mutation occurs during the integration. The offspring inherits a fractured code.
And humans have been doing this for a long time.
For millennia. Because humanity operates in the macro world, blinded by superficial attraction, societal norms, and the desperate biological drive to survive and populate, we have been blindly mixing incompatible quantum sequences for thousands of years. We haven't been checking the quantum code. We've just been checking the biological compatibility.
So what is the result of thousands of years of mutated integrations?
The author states that we have triggered a global quantum pandemic. This generational compounding of mutations generates what is called the quantum opposite within the individual.
Okay, I need to know exactly what the quantum opposite feels like. Is it a demon? Is it a metaphorical shadow self? Is it just bad luck?
No, it is highly mechanical and much more insidious. The quantum opposite manifests as literal ideas, urges, and justifications generated entirely inside your own brain. But these ideas are mathematically designed specifically to oppose your true pattern of creation.
Wait, let me make sure I'm getting this. Are you saying my biggest enemy isn't my awful boss, or a bad economy, or my toxic ex? My biggest enemy is a literal mathematical algorithm firing localized neurological signals inside my own brain, actively trying to sabotage my specific objective.
That is exactly what the framework claims. It is a localized, internal sabotage mechanism, and this mutation isn't distributed evenly across the population. The text uses a mathematical ratio analogy to explain how it manifests differently in different people. Everyone has a unique mix of their true creation essence and their mutated quantum opposite.
Give me an example of the ratios. How does it look in daily life?
Let's say a person is born with a ratio of 90% creation essence and 10% quantum opposite. That person is heavily aligned with their true pattern. They might be highly successful, incredibly creative. Maybe they lead a massive company or discover a cure for a disease. They execute their final capacity beautifully. But that 10% opposite still exists, and it has to manifest somehow to try and stop them.
How does 2% sabotage look?
It might manifest as a severe chronic biological illness they have to battle their entire life, or perhaps a singular devastating blind spot in their personal relationships that constantly drains their energy. The opposite attacks the weakest point in the coexistence parameters.
Okay, what about the reverse? What if someone is highly mutated?
Conversely, you could have a person who is born with 10% creation essence and 90% quantum opposite. Their internal algorithm is almost entirely dedicated to destruction. This manifests as a highly destructive or self-destructive individual. The text uses a very extreme, chilling example to illustrate how the quantum opposite orchestrates destruction in real space and time. It's the example of the serial killer.
Yes, the Four Gardens example. I read this part of the material, and it is a profound discussion on causality, victimization, and mathematical probability. Walk us through it slowly because it perfectly illustrates the coexistence blueprint.
Imagine a serial killer, driven by a 90% opposite mutation. He goes to 4 different gardens looking for a victim. He is essentially a quantum predator looking for the specific quantum prey his algorithm is programmed to target.
He goes to the first garden.
He goes to the first garden and he sees a girl, but this girl lacks the specific quantum attributes, the specific coexistence sequence that his opposite is programmed to recognize. Because the attributes don't align, there is no integration. He ignores her and she survives.
He goes to the second garden.
He goes to the second garden. The girl sitting there does possess the matching attributes. However, there is no communication. They don't make eye contact. She doesn't drop her book. The physical space-time scenario doesn't activate the sequence. Because there is no communication, the sequence breaks. She survives.
Third garden.
The third garden. He approaches a girl. There are no matching quantum attributes, but they do communicate. He asks her for the time. She answers. But because the underlying code doesn't match his predator sequence, the activation fails. He walks away. She survives.
But then, the fourth garden. The fatal integration.
He walks into the fourth garden. The girl sitting there perfectly matches the quantum attributes his opposite desires. Furthermore, they communicate. The physical and quantum sequences interlock flawlessly. The algorithm executes. She becomes the victim.
It is a terrifying way to look at tragedy. But I want to explore the brutal logic behind this. The framework is suggesting that being a victim isn't just random, chaotic bad luck. It's a mathematical collision of quantum sequences.
It removes the randomness from tragedy. The harsh logic presented is this. If that fourth girl had access to her quantum spacetime sequence, if she knew her 3-part blueprint, she would have known absolutely mathematically not to be in that specific garden at that exact moment in time.
Because her blueprint would have identified the serial killer's sequence as her absolute predator.
Exactly. But because she was operating in the blind macro world, influenced by her own quantum opposite, she was placed directly in the path of her destruction. The opposite actively maneuvers you into the crosshairs of your predators.
That is incredibly dark. But there is another example in the sources that is less violent, but I think equally profound in explaining how the opposite works. Because most of us aren't dealing with serial killers. Most of us are dealing with our own bad habits. Tell me about the liver and the chocolate.
This is a brilliant analogy for how we misattribute our suffering and shift the blame away from our internal code. Imagine a pious, deeply religious man who develops a terrible liver disease.
Okay, his liver is failing.
He goes to church, gets on his knees, and begs God to cure him. He blames divine will or spiritual test or simply the tragedy of old age for his suffering. He looks outward for the cause and the cure.
He's living completely in the macro world. He's guessing at the cause.
But the quantum reality, viewed through the Matrix XL, is totally different. The reality is that he was biologically and mathematically designed with a specific sequence. And his personal quantum opposite, his localized mutation, manifests as an intense, uncontrollable neurological craving for chocolate.
And chocolate, specifically for his unique biological sequence, acts as a slow-acting poison to his liver.
Yes. The addiction is the opposite at work. It fires the idea into his brain, just one piece of chocolate. You deserve it. It makes you feel better. He eats the chocolate, his liver degrades further, and then he goes back to the church to pray for a miracle.
It's localized, entirely self-inflicted sabotage disguised as a craving.
The framework argues that it is much easier for this man to pray to the sky, to shift the blame to a higher power or to bad genes, than to actually confront and fight the specific algorithmic addiction programmed into his space-time variance. The opposite hides behind a religion, it hides behind excuses, it hides behind I just have a sweet tooth. It uses your own thoughts to destroy your pattern.
So if I fail a business, it's not necessarily because the market turned. It might be because my quantum opposite generated the idea to hire the exact wrong person at the exact wrong time because it knew that integration would cause a fatal sequence.
You hired them feeling completely justified, thinking it was a brilliant macro world decision.
Wow. So to summarize this explosive concept for you, the listener, your profound suffering, your endless self-sabotage, your inability to break bad habits, it isn't weak willpower. It isn't a lack of discipline. It is literal quantum code trying to aggressively steer you off your pattern.
And knowing this terrifying reality, the discussion naturally has to move to application. If the quantum opposite is constantly inside the wire trying to sabotage us, and if the macro world scientific method is just a wasteful guessing game, how is the intelligent computerized quantum system actively used? How do we use the matrix XL to bypass hypotheses and solve massive real-world problems?
Right. How do we use the cheat code? The sources detail some staggeringly practical applications for this. Let's start with human health, because if you can map the exact space-time sequence of a disease, medicine completely changes.
It ceases to be a practice and becomes absolute engineering. In health, the claim is that this system can find the definitive antidotes for biological imbalances, complex diseases, and toxins without requiring years of trial and error in a laboratory.
Explain the mechanics of that. How does it bypass the lab?
Because every disease, let's say a specific strain of a virus, has its own three-part creation design. It has a point of integration. If you input the virus's space-time sequence into the matrix, the system calculates the exact mathematical sequence required to neutralize its final capacity. You don't guess which chemical compound might work. The algorithm tells you the exact mathematical structure of the antidote needed to break the virus's coexistence parameters.
No more mice trials. No more phase 3 human trials failing after 10 years. You just read the code and build the countercode. And what about business? This part absolutely blew my mind.
For business, the applications are arguably even more disruptive. The claim is the ability to create flawless 50-year projections for corporate entities. The Matrix XL can predict internal structural failures, calculate precise financial losses, and identify the absolute ideal hiring candidates.
Without ever stepping foot inside the corporate headquarters. Without ever looking at a single quarterly earnings spreadsheet.
Because the company itself is in existence. It was integrated on a specific day by specific founders with specific capital. It has a pattern, coexistence, and final capacity. You plug the corporate blueprint into the matrix. Then you plug a potential CEO's blueprint into the matrix. The system will tell you instantly if their quantum integration will result in unprecedented growth or catastrophic failure.
It eliminates the interview process, it eliminates market speculation,
Yeah.
and politics.
Yeah.
The texts explicitly mention mapping political systems.
Yes, mapping the creation design of an entire political party. By defining the space-time origin of the party, they claim they can precisely forecast the party's inherent weaknesses, map its trajectory, and screen candidates based strictly on their evolutionary quantum level. They can determine exactly how a politician will govern and who their quantum predators are long before they ever take the oath of office.
The efficiency claimed here is genuinely staggering. We are talking about taking what usually requires 20 years of massive research and development and reducing it down to 2 years. We are talking about reducing billions of dollars of blind research funding down to a tiny fraction of the cost. It completely and utterly skips the entire macro world trial and error phase.
It is a profound, fundamental disruption of how humanity generates and validates knowledge. But this immense power brings us to the final and undoubtedly most controversial philosophical claim found in the texts.
Brace yourselves for this one, folks.
We have to talk about the concept of the chosen. The framework asserts that the quantum DNA algorithm's ultimate overarching objective isn't just to exist, it is the evolution of creation to its absolute highest possible peak.
And just like we see operating out in raw nature, getting to the evolutionary peak isn't a team sport where everybody crosses the finish line and gets a participation trophy.
Exactly. The text uses a very harsh biological analogy. Think about a sea turtle emerging from the ocean to lay eggs on the beach. She lays hundreds of eggs in a single nest. Why so many? Because the biological algorithm already mathematically accounts for the fact that seagulls will eat some, crabs will eat others, and some will simply fail to hatch. Only a tiny fraction of those turtles are actually meant to survive the predators, reach the ocean, and achieve adulthood.
The mass casualty is built into the design.
Yes, and applying his exact same logic to humanity, the author explicitly states that not all human beings are meant to reach the evolutionary peak.
Wait, So all this profound knowledge, this entire Matrix XL system, the ability to bypass disease and optimize life, it isn't meant to save everybody. It's not a utopian tool to elevate the entire global population.
According to the framework, no. The text explicitly states that this knowledge is specifically meant to activate the brains of the chosen humans.
Who are the chosen? How are they defined?
They are the individuals who possess the specific quantum capacity, the ratio of essence to opposite, required to actually understand and utilize this code. They are the ones mathematically programmed to overcome their quantum opposite. These chosen few are the ones designed by the algorithm to lead the technological, scientific, and evolutionary leap for the rest of the planet.
So what happens to everyone else? The turtles who don't make it to the water.
The majority of humanity, due to their high levels of quantum mutation and their overwhelming opposites, will simply remain in the macro world. They will never understand the code. They will simply benefit from the slipstream of the progress made by the chosen few. They will take the perfect medicine, they will use the perfect technology, but they will remain blind to the algorithm running it.
Okay, I have to step in here and interrogate the philosophical way of that. If the algorithm intentionally designs some people to fail, and mathematically destines others to be the elite chosen who hold the keys to reality, how does the framework address the morality of that? Is it just a cold, heartless mathematical reality? As your host, I want to remind everyone listening that we are exploring the direct claims of the author, Licenciado Juan Carlos Pérez Velázquez. We aren't endorsing them as absolute truth, but you have to admit, as a thought experiment, it is incredibly potent. It forces you to completely reevaluate your definitions of equality, of biological determinism, and of scientific progress.
It demands that we strip away our comforting human emotions and look at existence through the lens of pure, unyielding math. It demands we ask ourselves, are the choices I am making today actually my own, born of free will? Or am I just smoothly executing a pre-written pattern while simultaneously being puppeteered by a mutated opposite inside my own neurology?
It's the ultimate existential question. So, to synthesize this monumental journey we've taken today, we started in the macro world, a transition period characterized by guessing, hypotheses, and relative human chaos. A world where ants try to study humans. And we moved into the micro world, a universe governed entirely by absolute space-time sequences. We explored the rigid three-part blueprint of pattern, coexistence, and capacity. And we confronted the terrifying realization that our greatest enemy isn't external, but an internal algorithm, the quantum opposite, mutating our own thoughts to ensure our destruction.
It is a profound transition, moving from a world built on comforting illusions and endless philosophical arguments to a universe built on absolute, unyielding algorithms.
And it brings us right back to the premise we opened with. If humanity really is just in a messy transition period, plagued by quantum mutations and arguing over the rendering of a video game, what happens when we finally crack the game?
That is the ultimate question we have to leave the listener with. If the quantum DNA framework is truly the absolute source code of the universe, and we are currently suffering through this chaotic transition period, what happens to human society when this code becomes fully accessible and operational?
If we successfully use the Matrix XL to eliminate all trial, all error, all disease, and all mystery from human existence, do we finally achieve our evolutionary peak? Or do we lose the very struggle, the very friction that makes us uniquely human? If you take away the guessing, do you take away the humanity?
That is something for you to mull over as you navigate your week. Look closely at your habits, check your quantum design, and watch out for your opposite whispering in your ear. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.